Hey folks, David Stewart here. The pop cult truly is religious in nature. Their sacrament, consume product. Get excited for next product. That's why we also call it the consumer cult. I'd like to show you a tweet that really exhibits what I'm talking about here. This is from Kevin Smith. He's a very well-known Hollywood director and a big comic book fan. Here's what he has to say. Religions have been founded on the Bible, resulting in millions of people deriving inspiration and moral strength from amazing stories about fantastic feats of faith. Hundreds of years from now, our descendants will find divine inspiration from the story of Cap wielding Mjolnir. There's a lot to unpack here. There's a couple things that I want to talk about, but the most obvious one is just the blatant replacing of religion with the pop cult. When I say consume product, get excited for next product, this is very advantageous for these corporate franchises. It's the obsession with corporate franchises that becomes the pop cult, and some people really do have a religious reverence towards the stories that Marvel has put out, towards the stories that DC has put out, or any of these corporate franchises. That's something that's really exhibited in this. They're making that strong connection. They're saying, hey, your stories from the past will be replaced with these stories. That's how important these stories actually are. So they're, Kevin Smith is saying that they're very important and that they will become more important to future generations, that they're kind of integrated into our culture in a religious way. There's actually a lot more to unpack here. That's the most obvious one, is the replacing of religion. And this can only happen, I think, for people who lack a serious faith, that they'll end up replacing what should be reverence towards God and a code of ethics that go with that. They're going to replace that with basically a cultish obsession with corporate IPs, corporate intellectual properties. Let's break down some of the things he says here, because this reveals to me that Kevin Smith knows nothing of religion, has no religion, and really does view the pop cult as his religion. So the first one, religions have been founded on the Bible. That is not true. Religions are not founded on texts. Rather, texts happen after the religion exists. The religion is lived by the people who have that religion. It's part of their culture. It's part of their daily lives. It's part of their code of ethics. It defines how they act and how they view the world. Religions are a living thing, and later they get codified into texts to help preserve them through the culture and through the posterity of what is there. So, for instance, the Torah was not written and then a group of people said, so now we shall have this religion. No, they were already Jewish. They were already had a reverence towards God and had religious practices associated with their relationship with God. And later the Torah was written down. In fact, the Old Testament was written over centuries. It wasn't that they finished the Old Testament and said, well, now we shall have a religion. No, the religion existed before that. Likewise, with the New Testament, it wasn't that, they wrote the New Testament and founded Christianity. Christianity was founded by Christ, continued by his apostles, and later the Gospels were written down and the epistles were collected. There was no set even book of the Bible until much later on into the history of Christianity. It's only later that you collect these things and make them into the book, because while you're living it, you don't need the text. The text only exists to help continue that religion forward. So no, religions are not founded on the Bible. Just as you can say Islam is founded on the Quran, but the Quran was not collected until after Muhammad's death. It was put together from all of the things after Muhammad died. So even when you look at something like Islam is existing before you start collecting the texts to continue it. The only religion I can really think of that starts with a text is maybe Mormonism, but that's really also started by a man, Joseph Smith, and it's also a continuation of the Christian tradition. So, no, religions have not been founded on the Bible. Religions exist and are lived by the people who have that religion, and later they get written down. Next part, resulting in millions of people deriving inspiration and moral strength from amazing stories about fantastic feats of faith. Let's try billions, but there's more to religion than stories. The stories in the Bible don't just like give you moral strength or something like that. There's a lot more to the Bible than stories. Most of the Bible, although the Old Testament is full of stories, most of it has to do with how you should live your life. And this is really true of the New Testament. You have the 4 Gospels, you have the book of Acts, which describe very explicitly the stories of Christ and the early Christian church. But for the most part, the epistles are letters written to various churches about how you should act. So the majority of the Bible, and really the heart of the religion, is not just the stories, but the codification of morals, ethics, traditions, your understanding of God, your relationship with God. These are the things that make up a religion, whether that religion is Christianity, whether it's Islam, whether it's Buddhism, and it's very, very different from Christianity. That's really what a religion is. It's that codified way of understanding the world, how you interact with God, and how you live your life. Religions are lived. They aren't just collections of stories. Likewise, the Old Testament is full of laws and things like that. So it's not just stories, it's law. So you can't really replace a religion with a pop cult without having some sort of law associated with it. And in general, the law is thou shalt not say bad things about the product. Thou shalt consume the product. So there is no epistle of Captain America telling you how you should act. There's occasionally kind of moral speeches that they give, but those are not quite the same as really like specific instructions for how you should live. They do make a connection here, though. Our descendants will find divine inspiration from the story of Cap-wielding Mjolnir. Again, he can't believe in divine inspiration because these stories are not divinely inspired. They're not about God, unless you're viewing Captain America and Thor as gods. Now, Thor is a pagan god, right? And so I think what is going on here is they view this canon of superhero stories, because superheroes act like powerful beings, like gods. They're equating it maybe with classical mythology, because this is what they think, that the religion of the Romans was this collection of myths to do with Jupiter and Venus. And, the Greeks were this collection of myths having to do with Zeus, basically the same gods. And the Norse had this belief in Thor and Odin. No, the stories are not those religions for those ancient people either. The Roman religion was very codified. It was about practicing the religion, the way that you sacrificed, who the priests were, what the priestly caste was supposed to do, the way you honored the gods, the way that you were supposed to act in order to gain the favor of the gods. All of this was lived by the Romans and the Greeks and everybody else who had a pre-Christian faith as well. Just because it was pre-Christian doesn't mean that it was just about stories or something like that. The stories are related to that. The stories are part of the religion, and it tends to be the thing that we focus on long after the culture has passed away into dust, because we don't preserve the living nature of that religion. We just kind of remember the stories, but that's not what they are. So there's no reason to believe that hundreds of years from now, a bunch of disconnected little stories about superheroes drawn in comic books are going to become a religion, because there's no law there. There's no canon. There's no substance to what is there, unless corporations are truly able to replace the human need for God with some sort of love of consuming products, of funneling money to corporations. And that's a really important thing to keep in mind here, is that it's very good for corporations to have people have a strong attachment to franchises, even a religious attachment to franchises. But that's not something that's natural, and that's something that you should really resist in yourself if you find yourself being obsessed with fandom, is to take a step back from that. It really is just a product. Now, I will say, anecdotally, I remember people being super upset about The Last Jedi and saying that, Kathleen Kennedy is destroying a cultural institution in Star Wars. And at first I thought that was a little hyperbolic, because I'm like, it's not like you can unwrite the stories of George Lucas. But if you are approaching this with this canonical view of a franchise like Star Wars, then yes, you can. You have essentially updated the canon text. You've written over what was and you've replaced it with something else. And that is going to be offensive. It is like a cultural institution because it is like a cultural myth. So when people say that, I should have listened a little more closely and taken their sentiments in a more meaningful way, is that people do have an almost religious attachment to Star Wars and to other sorts of franchises. And so when we see them being destroyed, that's going to have a big negative impact on people's emotional well-being, people who have a real strong attachment to these things, probably too strong an attachment to these things. And so that's really what I wanted to point out with this particular tweet. You can leave me your thoughts down below here with this attempt to replace, especially Christianity, but just religion in general, with a religious reverence towards these. It would be interesting to me if we were to go hundreds of years in the future and see scholars debating about what the actual text is supposed to be, because we have like 20 different continuities with Captain America. How can you have a religious text that has no sense of fluidity between the various parts? It's all kind of interconnected like a giant soap opera, and yet they reboot it every couple of years. There's all kinds of canonic conflicts. Things are tossed out of canon. And it's almost like with Star Wars, you had kind of an iconoclasm where Disney bought the franchise, declared itself the grand priest and prophet of the religion of Star Wars, and then declared all of the EU books to be apocrypha. They're no longer canon. They no longer matter. They're no longer part of the Bible, so to speak. And we get to decide what's actually going to be in the Star Wars Bible. It's an interesting way of looking at it. But leave me your thoughts down below on what you think about it, and I'll see you guys next time. Newest book is called Keys to Prolific Creativity. It will be out in March. And newest book that you can buy right now, Eyes on the Walls, 99 cents for the ebook on Amazon. I'll see you guys next time.